Hello class, it's Professor Streeter. In this video, I want to shift from the topic that we looked at last week, advantages and disadvantages of the contractarian or the social contract approach to ethics, and then look at a few notes on the idea of feminism and what distinguishes a feminist approach to ethics, which is one of our topics for this week. Okay, so let me put myself in the bottom of the screen and return to these notes from last week. I'll share these notes again with you and the slideshow on feminism. But recall that we looked at some of the advantages of the approach last week, and I'm not going to go through this again in great detail because I want to turn to some of the problems with the view. But it does capture the sense, right, in which morality is a system of rules that applies to human beings living in society, right? So in the absence of a social structure, in the absence of society, there is no such thing as morality. That's an appealing view for many. And it gives us a straightforward procedure. And we talked about that procedure. I ask myself, is this a rule or a principle or a norm that all free and equal and rational, self-interested beings would agree to under the conditions of a hypothetical contract, right? Are these rules that all free and equal and rationally self-interested beings would agree to live by? If not, right, then that shows there's something wrong with the rule or the principle or the policy from a moral point of view. It gives us a way of criticizing a legal system, a constitutional system. It gives us a way of justifying and criticizing individual actions that we engage in, right? Is this action consistent with rules that the contractors would agree to, or does it somehow violate those rules? Again, now that we talked about the contract, right? It depends on the assumption that everyone is obeying the rules, right? And that there is some body, institution that has the authority to enforce the rules and to punish offenders. Right? But if all of that is in place, then the social contract, the implicit social contract, gives us a way of a procedure, right, for justifying rules and actions from a moral point of view, and doing so without reference to God, right? We can explain the moral legitimacy of a law, of a policy, of an action, with reference to the hypothetical agreement of the contractors, right? We don't have to. We can understand the origin of morality as, in some sense, the product of an agreement between people, a hypothetical agreement between people to live by a set of rules. In the absence of that agreement, right, we all descend into a state of nature, and that doesn't benefit everyone. So ultimately, we all benefit from a civil society, from entering into a social contract with each other. Okay, so that, and the other advantages of the view is that it explains why it's sometimes morally acceptable to break the rules. Right, if the terms of the social contract break down, right, I don't have to abide by it anymore myself. But in general, under normal conditions, I have a moral responsibility to obey the law, unless it's an unjust law, and we looked at that example too last week. It explains, from a moral point of view, why a system of punishment is legitimate, because it's the only way the state can preserve the social contract and preserve social harmony, right? Otherwise, right, without a system of punishment in place, right, we run the risk of descending into a state of nature. Okay, so but let's look at some of the problems with the view. So this comes up starting on page 219 in Shafer-Landau's The Fundamentals of Ethics. So this is chapter 14. Okay, he looks at the advantages of the view in chapter 13, and then in chapter 14 he turns to some of the problems with the view, some objections. So the first big problem he considers is the free rider problem, right? So, and this is, I assume, familiar to you. The appeal of the free rider or the existence of the free rider seems to pose a problem for the social contract, right? Who is the free rider? Well, he's the one who assumes that the vast majority of people are following the rules and cooperating with the terms of the social contract. But on that assumption, right, if I assume that everyone's following the rules, then I, the free rider, can benefit from public goods, like a public transit system, on the condition that everyone is paying for their bus ticket or everyone is paying for their train ticket, right? I can benefit from that public good without contributing anything of my own, without paying for my ticket. And in some countries like Germany, for example, there's a kind of honor system. You get on the train, you don't have to go through a turnstile or go through any device to get on the train. You just pay for your ticket, you get on the train. If you are stopped by a police officer and you don't have a ticket, then you get a big fine. But oftentimes, you can get on the train and not get your ticket checked. You can run that risk. But my point is, right, if you really think you can get away with it, if you're the free rider and you really think you can get away with not paying your ticket, well, then you can benefit from the good of public transit without paying your way, without sacrificing anything of your own, right? On the condition that everyone else is following the rules, right? Because if everyone stops paying for their ticket, right, the system of public transit would break down because it's paid for by the public. So it's unfair. There's something unfair about it, right? Trying to benefit from a public good without contributing anything myself is unfair, right? Because it assumes that everyone else is contributing something of their own, right? And there's nothing special about me. But it does seem rational. This is the problem. It seems like a rational calculation. Maybe not in the case of not paying for your bus ticket because maybe there's too much of a risk. It's too risky. What if you get caught? Right? But you can think of other examples where, right, you can benefit from a public service or a public good without putting anything in yourself, and you don't really risk getting caught, or you don't risk any great punishment. Right? So libraries, for example. Okay, you can think of your own examples, but the free rider is a real problem. The contractarian has to have a way of explaining why the free rider is making the wrong decision or making an irrational decision, or how does the contractarian convince the free rider that she has a reason to contribute to public goods if she believes that she can benefit from those public goods without contributing anything herself, right? How do you convince the free rider that she's made a mistake? Okay, right, and notice that all of us at one point in our lives have felt the lure of free riding, right? The free rider is the person that we envy, right? When we're contributing to public goods, to public services. We resent the free rider, and many of us feel some kind of pull to contribute something of our own. But right, what do we say to the free rider? That's one problem. A second problem that he considers is the role of consent, right? The idea that we have a moral duty to honor the terms of the contract, right? This presupposes that we have entered into the contract, that we've given our consent, right, to each other, to the state, right? That we've made a promise to uphold our end of the agreement. But have we, right? Have we actually given our consent? Have we actually made the promise? If the social contract theorist can't show me that I have given my consent, either implicitly or explicitly, or that I've explicitly or implicitly made a promise to uphold the terms of the contract, right? Then I don't have any moral duty to honor that contract, right? So the role of consent is very important for the social contract theorist. Why should I play by the rules? Because I have either explicitly or implicitly given my consent, right, to do so, and on the condition that everyone else does as well. And so since I've given my consent, I can't opt out or back out just because it's not convenient for me right now to follow the rules. Okay. Because under these conditions of the hypothetical contract, these are rules that I would have agreed to, or I gave my consent to, at least implicitly. Okay, but how important is this idea of consent, right? And so many have argued that, look, since there isn't an adequate sense that I've consented, then contractarianism fails, right? So here's the argument against the contractarian. that we have a duty to obey the law or follow the terms of the contract only if we've consented to do so. Many have not given their consent to obey the law, so many people do not have a duty to obey it, right? That's the simple argument. Then ask yourself if that's a good argument or not. Certainly, many people have not explicitly given their consent, but in enjoying the benefits of a system of a social system, being a citizen of a country, let's say, and enjoying the benefits that that nation's laws and social services provide, is that enough to show that I've given consent to its laws, right? That I'm benefiting from them in some way. Okay, so that's a second problem. And then the third problem, look, the contractors might disagree, right? If our moral responsibilities are to uphold the terms of the contract, well, what are the rules that all contractors would reasonably agree to, right? And there does seem to be room for reasonable disagreement. And so if agreement among the contractors is what determines our moral standards, well, what happens when the contractors disagree? How do we resolve those disagreements? That's a potential problem for the theory. And then lastly, and this came up in the essay by Carruthers, who defends a contractarian approach and argues that since non-human animals are not parties to the contract, we don't have direct moral responsibilities to them, or they don't have rights. Only contractors who can claim rights, who are in a position to claim their rights and agree to what rights they should have, right, really have rights. And so since animals can't enter into the terms of the contract, since they're not rational in that way, animals don't have the same rights as human beings, right? This is the problem of the scope of the moral community, right? According to the contractarian, we only have direct moral responsibilities to fellow contractors or to beings who are capable of seeking terms of cooperation. Why does the contractarian think this? Because they're the only ones who have the ability to harm us if we don't cooperate with them, or benefit if we do. Okay, the other animals don't have the ability to harm us if we don't cooperate with them. They're not in a position to benefit from our cooperation with them in the same sense, right? So only beings who satisfy those two conditions, right, really enjoy full moral status. We only have direct moral responsibilities to those beings, right? Well, so what about the other animals, right? And look, if we say that animals are not contractors and that therefore we don't have direct responsibilities to them, right, because they can't seek out terms of cooperation, well then what doesn't it follow that infants, children, and older people who have lost their mental capacities, right, they're also incapable of seeking out terms of cooperation. So does it follow that children and mentally disabled individuals and senile older people does it follow that we don't have direct moral responsibilities to them? Right? So if we can get what we want from the other animals without sacrificing anything in return, then why should we sacrifice anything to them? But we can ask the same question about other human individuals, right? So this is a problem, right? It suggests that it's both rational and morally acceptable to exploit non-human animals for our own benefit, and providing this exploitation doesn't involve treating fellow contractors unfairly. Okay. I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna shift to the next video. We'll turn to questions about feminism, but those are some problems that emerge in the contractarian view. Okay.